But it'll be kind of like believing in a pot plant. I believe with all my strength. I'm so sincere. Today, don't people say this? They say, well, all faith is equal. All of it's equally effective as long as you're sincere in what you believe. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. There is such a thing as ineffective faith. You can believe in something that's not true and it won't do anything for you. And actually, the advertised good effects of it are largely just the products of imagination. If Christ is not risen, your faith is futile. Then look, you are still in your sins, which basically says if the resurrection's not true, probably the cross that occurred a few days before is not true either. The whole thing's not true. You're still in your sins. But here's the good news. When the apostles talked about the resurrection, they announced it like it was a newspaper headline. It was a thing that happened, not a philosophy. You know, most of the apostles were fishermen and blue-collar workers. There's a couple of hardcore sinners. But by and large, they did not arrive at the thought of the resurrection by meditating under a tree. And one day they arrived at enlightenment. Hey, let's tell everybody that Jesus resurrected. Yeah, let's do that. This was not a product of myth development. Listen, I've been in full-time ministry for years. I've written books about this. By and large, there are, hundreds of alternate theories. One of them, this was just the product of years of myth development. But according to the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and 4, he told the Corinthians this, I delivered this to you first of all, that which I also received. First of all, that Jesus was crucified for your sins according to the Scriptures and was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. This was from the word go, from the beginning of all Christian thought. Christians always believed that Jesus rose from the dead. That is what basically defines what a Christian actually is. First and foremost, I believe he rose from the dead. And that was the same in church history. From day one, they all believed. From day one. And for those that doubted, the Bible even goes into specific narrative to show Jesus trying to dissolve any kind of doubt that might have been there. I'll get to that in a second. But the fact was, this was not a philosophy. This was not a myth or anything. When Peter talked about the resurrected Jesus, the Apostle Peter, he used this word, eyewitness. 2 Peter 1:16, and incidentally, any verse that I reference is referenced there in your bulletin. So you can go back and make sure that I've spoken accurately here. Peter used the word eyewitness. And you know what he even wrote? He said, we did not devise cunning myths. When talking about the coming of Christ, the miracles that he did, his death and resurrection, we did not make this up. We were eyewitnesses of that one's majesty. We saw it. Paul, the apostle, in 1 Corinthians 15, arguably the best chapter on resurrection in the whole Bible, says this, he testified the 12 apostles saw him, among them Peter, then James, and then Paul said, I saw him. And then now listen to this clincher. He said, and besides us, 500 brethren saw him alive from the dead. 500 eyewitnesses. Now, John the Apostle, and I like this, John the Apostle, when he wrote his epistle, which is his letter, his first letter, talked about it this way. And let me set you up for this first, okay? John here is the last surviving one of the 12. He's the last surviving apostle that had actually walked with Jesus from those early days, something like 90 years old, in an age where the life expectancy is mostly 45 or so. So he has gone way beyond that. 90 years old, and you know what tends to happen to you when you get much, much older? You tend to get more honest about the past. you kind of look back and reflect, and you become rather confessional. Take a quick tour, stop off in this example. When I was growing up, there were all kinds of talk among grade school kids about the Loch Ness Monster. Don't worry, I'll get back to my point in a second. Okay. All kinds of talk about the Loch Ness Monster. And anybody remember Weekly Reader? I loved Weekly Reader, and they would have these great photos in there. Some people believe this, some people don't. And then they'd have this one iconic photo. You remember that photo where the thing's head is sticking up out of the water? It looks like a dinosaur. And I saw that, and wow! It's real! Well, what was it? 4 or 5 years ago, 3 years ago? The man that took the picture, a medical doctor, I suppose toward the end of his life on his deathbed, told somebody, I faked that photo. None of that's true. The report I gave, all that, none of it's true. Faked the whole thing. And this is just a little, I don't know, a little plan between him and maybe 1 or 2 other people. No more than 3 people. He said, look, I took my kid's toy submarine and I glued something on the top that looked like a dinosaur head. And now look, didn't the photo, those of you that know the photo, didn't it become famous? It's just everywhere. It's the iconic photo of Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. And the guy that took it confesses on his deathbed, it ain't true. Of course, I was crushed, even as a grown man. I want there to be a monster in that lake. Well, here's John the Apostle at the end of his life. And he's writing. And he probably knows he probably doesn't have long to live. Now, if you have helped to foist some kind of delusion upon large numbers of people, the more years go by, the prouder you get. I fooled all of them. Perfect. Wait till they find out. It's just a big hoax. So here he is, an old man. And you'd think in a fit of honesty, he might say, well, actually, we stole the body. April Fool.